Hi, it's Michelle Ockers, a modern workplace learning practitioner and organisational learning and development strategist. And today, as you can see, I'm not in Sydney, I'm somewhere a little exotic. I am in Singapore and I'm in the Gardens by the Bay right now. The building you can see behind me is the magnificent Marina Sands, where I've been staying for the past few days whilst I've been attending and talking at the Learning Technologies Asia Conference, the inaugural conference here in Singapore. So I thought I would take some time as I'm wandering around the gardens to reflect a little on the conference. At this particular conference, I had a few commitments I needed to fulfill. I was a speaker. I spoke on getting started with working out loud in your organisation. I chaired a panel discussion on learning and development in large organisations, and I chaired Helen Blunden's content curation session. So that constrained me a little bit in terms of my choice of going to other sessions that were running in parallel. Now, this sculpture in the background, it's a sculpture. Yes, it's a large naked floating baby. Tony Buzan was the keynote speaker. Of course, he was a fellow who came up with mind mapping and has continued to work with mind mapping over his career. Now, I didn't agree with everything he said, and I think the linkage to the so what does this mean for learning and development professionals, was lacking. However, one thing he did talk about which resonated with me was the idea of creativity. And one of the things Tony Buzan talks about is the level of creativity declining over time from being a child through the education system through to being an adult. And he suggests, well, this is normal, it is not natural. And certainly I think it's not too hard with a little bit of curiosity and a little bit of effort to reopen your creativity or to recognise where you already are creative in your life. After the keynote, the first session that I attended was Helen Blunden's session on curation, content curation for personal learning. And one of the things I really liked in that session, first it was very practical. So she talked a lot about the why of curation, why she curates. She made it quite personal. She also shared a lot of the tools she uses, a lot of her own practices, and provided a fantastic little sketch note of how she uses Harold Jarke's personal knowledge mastery framework, the Seek, Sense, Share model, to guide her curation. And you can look at your strategies and tactics for how you seek content to curate, how you sense make about that, because content curation is not just about gathering links, gathering resources, but it's also very much about making sense of them, looking at what are the themes, how do you tie them together to make sense and meaning, to organise the collection effectively, and then share how of the 3 sessions on trends in learning and learning technologies that were at the conference. I was able to attend just the one, which was a keynote given by Steve Wheeler on digital learning futures. And he kick-started his session by pointing out that we can't accurately predict the future, but we can anticipate the future. He did say that technology is going to hit us faster with more ferocity, and that the future is exponential. It's going to impact every aspect of our lives, and that we probably underestimate the degree to which it's going to impact. From a learning and development perspective, some of the, I'm going to cherry pick some of the trends here. The first one he talked about was that learning is becoming increasingly social, personal and connected. I'm going to come back to this because I think this is a really important theme and critical for the future of learning and development, that we get our heads around this and figure out how we're going to respond to this, how we're going to support it. So he talked about learning being richly social, intensely personal and closely connected, and that digital technology has the capacity to enhance that by building connection, by sustaining and continuing the learning experience with other people. The second key trend he talked about was that we're moving from just in case learning to just in time, just enough and just for me learning. And I think this is one that's a well-established trend. Immersive technology, I attended a session on virtual reality and augmented reality at the conference, given by Lionel, and it really highlighted some of the stuff that Steve Wheeler was talking about when he was talking about increasingly technology going to become immersive. You know, when you're talking about being able to put on a headset and enter a different world, and to do that alongside other people and have new experiences that might be difficult for you to have from a learning experience due to things such as safety or the distance and reach and the affordability of putting you into the real environment. Steve talked about machine intelligence and how far machine intelligence can go, and whether artificial intelligence is going to enhance people doing their job and we will work with the robots, or whether they will take over roles. And he's certainly in the school that machine intelligence cannot replace the building of human relationships and emotional connection. Steve also walked through a number of megatrends, and for some of these I think we're kind of on the tail end of the megatrend. We all know about them, we see them, we're in the midst of them, we're getting on with them, whereas others are perhaps trends we kind of are aware of but haven't really grappled with yet. So from instructor-led to learner-led, I think we all understand that, and we're playing around with different ways of bringing that to action. From recursive or repeated content to discursive content, allowing learners some latitude to do personal research. And the big one, from standardised to personalised. And he talked about the difference between user experience versus design. So instead of saying to people, this is your learning pathway, learning and development should say, if that's the way you're learning, I will try to support you with that. And helping learners to connect the dots, letting learners do as much as they can, but with the caveat that it's not to the detriment of the company. Because that moves nicely into some of what we covered in the panel discussion on learning and development in large organisations. Or some of the discussion we had was about empowering people to be more self-directed in their learning, and how do you scaffold that experience. So using, for instance, competency frameworks so people can see the pathway, giving them some sort of pathway, but allowing them to self-direct through that pathway to some degree. Of course, compliance training, mandatory training, got to be done. Finding more engaging ways to do that, more effective ways to do that. I think adaptive learning is a key play in this space. A lot of the vendors who are exhibiting were talking about the adaptive learning built into their platform. Some of it's kind of baby steps, in as much as it's really just assessment led. Some of the adaptive or personalised learning is a little more than the kind of the Amazon, like if you feeding people content based on preferences, based on what other people who've done a course or read a book have also done. I think there's a risk of a bit of the echo chamber in that, and that we would be well served to help people to uncover what they don't know, or to help them explore at the boundaries in order to innovate, in order to expand their thinking and understanding. The term I picked up at the conference to move through their discovery pathway, and I picked that up from Blue Bottle Biz, who talk about discovery pathways as part of the way that their online platform works. Speaking of discovery, let's go see what's inside this dome. We're in the cloud forest, and I tell you, it is so cool in here. It is such a relief after being out in the humidity in the gardens. So as always, I'm drawn to learn more about social learning, around knowledge sharing, about working out loud. And one of the speakers I was fortunate to hear was Julian Stodd. I'm aware of Julian's work. I've dipped in and out of it a little bit, but I've never taken a close look at it, and I certainly will be taking a much closer look at Julian's work after his presentation. There was a lot in his presentation which was more theoretical rather than applied and practical, but it gave me glimpses of the potential practical value of his work. He talked a lot about the difference between formal structures and social structures, where formal structures rely very much on power and are all about control, and that formal learning is about control as well. And he contrasted this with social structures where they work on trust rather than power, and that understanding these social structures in our organisation, how our networks work, is critical to supporting and enabling social learning effectively and unleashing the power of it. So I will be certainly digging more into Julian's work. He's doing a stack of research at the moment around trust. I'm back in the hotel room because it poured down rain when I was in the gardens. In terms of social learning, there was one session I went to about a topic called learning circles, which was presented by some local presenters, some Singaporeans. Prashant, Jain was one of the presenters. They got everybody who was in the session to log into a platform called WizTango, which is a collaborative learning platform. And at first I thought, yeah, is this just kind of like a way of promoting a particular platform from the stage? But it turns out it was just a clever way of getting us to participate in their presentation and for them to deliver the presentation in effect and engage us in some peer-to-peer learning using the platform. So it was quite aligned with the topic. Now, learning circles originated, it would appear, as study circles in Europe in the late 19th century. They're used extensively in Sweden, and the Singaporean government is promoting them. There's an APAC Lifelong Learning Council, which has a goal of facilitating a national learning model that is by the community, with the community, so peer-based learning. And they actually fund community-based initiatives to run these learning circles, as well as being willing to provide some funding for circles to be run within enterprise. Of course, the Asian culture values education very highly, and you know, if we think we have some struggles in places like the US, Europe, Australia, in shifting the paradigm from formal learning and people in organisations expecting to be trained, challenges in encouraging people into knowledge sharing initiatives. Culturally, I think it's more difficult in the Asian regions. And in fact, in my Working Out Loud circle, my Working Out Loud presentation, after the presentation, someone came up to me and spoke about just that challenge in her organisation locally. What was mostly of interest to me was the fact that the government is funding these initiatives and actively promoting more of a community-based approach to learning. The last session I wanted to talk about is the panel discussion on learning and development in large organisations that I hosted. The panellists were Fiona from Standard Chartered, Jain from OCBC, and LoPresti from Austin Health. I opened the panel by asking about what success means for learning and development in a large organisation. And Rob talked about basically setting people up with the knowledge, skills and abilities for success in their roles. And the way the discussion flowed was like there's some things that are kind of a given. They are things that learning and development must get right. They're the fundamentals, they're the basics. So compliance training is one of those. But beyond that, getting those basics right around getting people role ready, making them safe, making sure you're meeting compliance requirements. There was quite a bit of discussion in the panel around empowerment and empowering people to be self-directed in their learning, creating a learning environment. Fiona in particular spoke quite a lot about being human-centric, so taking quite a bit of time to understand learners in different areas. And of course, she works across a range of different countries and cultures, and made the point that there's different states of readiness, different states of openness, different states of willingness to engage with more modern delivery approaches. The other thread through the discussion was around really understanding your business and your business needs. So being on top of what was happening in your industry, understanding your people, understanding the business strategy. You can't train everything, you can't support every initiative in the organisation, and it's sort of like not trying to meet everybody's learning needs constantly, because you'll never get there, and because it's about being more business-like in terms of deciding where to invest your learning and development resources and effort. So to summarise some of the key themes that stood out for me based on my experience of the conference, the first one is about the pace of change in technology and the fact that it's probably going to affect our lives and the way we work more significantly than most of us realise at the moment, and that the pace of change will just continue to be exponential and accelerate. This puts more emphasis on individuals to learn, to keep abreast of change, because L&D departments can't keep up
with a demand to train people, and we're well beyond, there's this mega trend around moving from instructor-led to learner-led approaches, and that's going to continue. Part of the picture there is, of course, social learning and peer-to-peer learning. So there is a need for us not only to look at how to utilise technologies effectively to underpin that, but even more importantly to understand social structures and the impact of social structures on people's willingness and confidence to share knowledge. If I can paraphrase Laura Overton, who had the opportunity to have a last say, she was put on the spot to have a last say as part of the wrap-up for the conference on day 2, she basically urged people to just do it. Get in there, individually stay abreast of what's happening in the industry, try things, see what works, be the role model, but more importantly, be action oriented to figure out how it is you're going to support your people to learn and to keep up with the pace of change moving forward.